The low, damp air of the cave clung to Ethan, thick with the scent of wet stone and something else, something intoxicating and strange. He woke with a gasp, his head pounding. Across the narrow space, Julian Croft stirred, his usually immaculate blazer torn at the shoulder. Julian, his rival since freshman year, the one person whose effortless success made Ethan's teeth ache. Julian's face, normally a study in cool indifference, was flushed, his eyes glassy and unfocused. A pair of soft, white ears, unmistakably those of a rabbit, twitched in his dark hair. The sight was so absurd Ethan almost laughed, but a wave of heat rolled through his own body, a dizzying biological command that had nothing to do with humor. The air was saturated with two distinct aromas. One was a dark, complex scent of aged oak and black cherry, emanating from Julian. The other, he realized with a growing sense of horror, was coming from himself. A sweet, almost cloying smell of burnt caramel and cream. Julian's gaze, deep and hazy, finally landed on him. A low growl rumbled in Julian's chest, his voice emerging as a strained rasp, demanding that Ethan avert his eyes. Julian looked like he was fighting a losing battle against some internal fever, a vulnerability Ethan had never witnessed. But Ethan, feeling the aggressive surge of his own altered chemistry, felt no fear. He told himself he had nothing to be afraid of. He wanted to do more than just look. A wicked grin spread across his face as he reached out, his fingers brushing against the velvet-soft fur of one of Julian's ears. He taunted him, remarking on how the campus Ice King had somehow become a bunny. The scent of rich Merlot intensified, and Ethan's own body responded, a primal instinct waking in his blood. He commented on the irony that an Omega like Julian would have such a potent, top-shelf pheromone, while he, an Alpha, smelled like a candy shop. Julian's expression twisted. He informed Ethan, each word a struggle, that Ethan was the one who smelled of caramel. Strawberry caramel, to be precise. The painful realization crashed down on Ethan. There was no one else in the cave. This was his reality. The potent pheromones in the confined space stoked the fire in his veins, and an undeniable physical reaction made his situation humiliatingly clear. Julian's gaze drifted down, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. The biological imperatives of this world were screaming at him. Temporary marking, that's what they called it. He ground his teeth, his eyes scanning the pale column of Julian's neck. Julian saw the predatory intent in his eyes and coldly warned him not to even think about it. Ethan waved a dismissive hand, trying to play it cool, suggesting they were modern men and it was no different from a bug bite. But Julian was unmoving. Fueled by a strength that wasn't entirely his own, Ethan lunged, easily pinning the disoriented Julian to the cave floor. He leaned in and bit down on the back of Julian's neck. The explosion of the wine-like scent was overwhelming, almost knocking him out. Instinct took over, and he was about to press his advantage when a sharp kick sent him reeling. Julian's face was now pale and severe, the flush of heat replaced by cold fury. He accused Ethan of being insane. The problem was, the mark hadn't quenched the fire inside Ethan at all. The throbbing pressure in his lower body was agonizing. Through gritted teeth, he asked Julian why he still felt so awful. Julian sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. He explained that a temporary mark only soothed an Omega's heat. An Alpha in Rut had two choices: find an inhibitor or find an Omega to sleep with. Silence hung between them. In this remote wilderness, there were no inhibitors. And if Ethan dared to try anything else, he had no doubt Julian would find a way to castrate him. He clutched his head in misery. A moment later, Julian's slender hand grabbed the back of his collar and hauled him out of the cave. The crisp, clean air helped clear his head slightly. As he took a deep breath, his eyes fell on the back of Julian's neck. The fair skin was marred by the bright red of his teeth marks. The sight, combined with Julian's aristocratic profile, sent an unwelcome jolt of desire through him. He was a straight man, This world, this biology, was twisting him into something he didn't recognize. Julian, with an unerring sense of direction, led them down the mountain. They found a town and a 24-hour pharmacy where Julian bought him a syringe of inhibitor. Watching Julian tap his sleek black CR card to pay, Ethan checked his own pockets, finding nothing but lint and a crumpled dollar bill. The disparity in their new circumstances was stark. Julian looked up an address on his phone, a high-rise apartment under his name. Ethan, effectively homeless, trailed behind him like a lost dog, pleading for a place to stay for old time's sake. Julian didn't refuse, simply striding into the building without a word. Even with the inhibitor, a residual discomfort lingered. Ethan collapsed on the guest bed, feeling like a wreck. When Julian came to get him for dinner, he frowned at the faint scent of caramel still clinging to the air and told Ethan to get his pheromones under control. Ethan felt a surge of self-pity. He whined that he was trying, then moved closer to Julian, admitting the proximity helped. He asked if he could just stay close to him that night. Julian's rabbit ears twitched in irritation, and he flatly refused. Ethan looked at him with pleading eyes, insisting he felt terrible. Julian asked if he was seriously trying to guilt-trip him. Ethan coughed, admitting that he was. Julian turned away, telling him they would talk after they ate. Later that night, Ethan simply lay down on Julian's bed. Julian walked in and stared, speechless. Ethan stated that since he'd helped Julian with a temporary mark, it was only fair that Julian help him in return. Morally blackmailed, Julian finally relented, allowing Ethan to sleep beside him, a tense truce in the king-sized bed. But sleep wouldn't come. Ethan found himself whispering into the darkness, telling Julian how good he smelled, how his lips looked, making increasingly suggestive comments until Julian gritted out for him to not push his luck. To keep Ethan from causing more trouble, Julian arranged a job for him. He owned countless businesses in this world and found one a block away from the apartment. Ethan happily signed a contract for a receptionist position paying $75,000 a year. But on his first day, trouble found him. A bulky man named Mark, a supervisor, blocked his path in the lobby, his eyes roaming over Ethan's body. He made a crude comment about Ethan looking tasty, his tongue darting out to lick his lips. This was a new and unwelcome experience. Ethan tried to explain that he was an alpha. Mark just smirked, saying he didn't mind, that two alphas could still have fun. The man stepped closer, his own pheromone, a greasy, overpowering smell of cheap hot dogs and stale sweat, washing over Ethan. He tried to touch him. Out of pure disgust and panic, Ethan's own untrained pheromones flared, the sweet caramel scent flooding the air. The man inhaled deeply, a predatory grin spreading across his face as he suggested Ethan was trying to seduce him. He lunged, trying to kiss him. Revulsion coiled in Ethan's stomach. He shoved the man back, landing 2 solid punches. He shouted at him to get away. The man just hissed, touching the corner of his bleeding mouth with a thumb, a strange smile on his face. He said Ethan's defiance didn't make sense. Beating him didn't work. At his wit's end, Ethan blurted out that he and Mr. Croft were a couple. The supervisor scoffed, looking Ethan up and down with derision. He claimed that if Ethan was with Julian Croft, then he was Julian Croft's father. He boasted of having worked there for 3 years, noting that Mr. Croft rarely visited this subsidiary. He sneered at the idea that Mr. Croft's partner would be working the front desk. Ethan pulled out the employment contract, pointing to the salary. The man squinted at it, then declared it was probably a fake. Exasperated, Ethan called Julian's main office. The executive assistant answered, informing him that Mr. Croft was in a meeting. Ethan spoke in a rush, leaving a desperate message that if Julian didn't come get his friend from back home, he was about to be assaulted in the branch office lobby. He kicked out at the supervisor, who was still trying to grab him. When Julian arrived, the man had managed to pull Ethan's jacket off. Ethan was struggling, but the man was built like a bull. Julian's face was a mask of ice. He began to pull the man off Ethan. But the supervisor, already high on aggression, turned his attention to Julian, his eyes lighting up with a new, lecherous fire. He remarked that this little Omega was even hotter, and that he liked them feisty. He turned back to Ethan with disgust, saying he'd lost interest, that he was now drawn to Julian. He told Julian he liked a strong Omega who fought back. Julian's hand moved in a blur, slapping the man across the face. Ethan tried to stop him, knowing it would only make things worse. Sure enough, the supervisor's face lit up with ecstatic pleasure. He moaned that the Omega's hands were soft, fragrant. Julian, however, was not indulging him. His expression was grim. As the man continued to spew filth, Julian hit him again, and again a rapid series of precise, brutal slaps until the man's face was a swollen mess and he was sobbing for it to stop. Julian, his knuckles white, asked in a voice like shattering ice if he was still enjoying himself. The man, covering his face, whimpered that he wasn't. Ethan stared at Julian's hand, at the prominent veins and the sheer power behind the blows. He had a fleeting, insane thought about how much it would hurt if that hand. He shook his head violently. What was this world doing to him? Julian finished and turned his glacial gaze on Ethan. He asked with a hypocritical smile if he wanted to feel good too. Ethan shook his head frantically. Julian then told him to grab his things and follow him, adding that they would settle things that night. Ethan hesitated and Julian saw it. He sneered, his voice dangerously low. He reminded Ethan that Omegas had a chance to mutate into Alphas. He then asked if Ethan wanted to try those things he'd been so eager for before. He threatened to break his legs and chain him to the bed if he tried to run. The thought of what Julian had been through terrified Ethan. They were enemies, but Julian had never been this cold, this menacing. He followed Julian to the corporate headquarters, his face a mask of stoicism. In the elevator, he tried to placate him, reminding him they were both men. Julian's lips thinned. He sarcastically asked why Ethan hadn't remembered that when he was harassing him the night before. Ethan promised he wouldn't dare do it again. At the main office, employees stared as they walked past. One young man, holding a stack of files, gave Ethan a particularly nasty look. He was petite with wide, rabbit-like eyes. He approached Julian, addressing him as Mr. Croft, and asked where he had been. He then glanced at Ethan, noting aloud that he seemed to be of low status, and that Julian should stay away from such people. Julian's voice was sharp as he cut him off, informing his secretary, Leo, that his private affairs were not his concern. The swift, public rebuke silenced any further comments. Inside Julian's expansive office, the man loosened his tie, a sign of his lingering irritation. He gestured to an inner door, telling Ethan there was a room inside for him to rest. Ethan stood frozen, confused. Julian pinched the bridge of his nose, asking what was wrong, if he hadn't slept well. Ethan twisted the hem of his shirt, muttering a question about why Julian was suddenly being so considerate. Julian's lips formed a humorless line. He stated that Ethan's presence was affecting his work efficiency. Disappointment pricked at Ethan. Julian watched him for a second, a half-smile playing on his lips. He asked why Ethan was so reluctant to rest, unless he was hoping for something to happen. That sent Ethan scurrying into the private suite. The room was luxurious, with a double bed and a floor-to-ceiling window offering a stunning view of the city. His mind, corrupted by his new biology, immediately supplied him with lurid scenarios. He slapped himself on the head twice, trying to knock the thoughts out. The force made him dizzy, and he stumbled, falling onto the bed with his rear in the air. Just then, Julian entered with a tray of snacks. He paused, taking in the scene. He observed dryly that it seemed Ethan really did want something. Ethan scrambled to cover himself, insisting he just lost his balance. Julian held his forehead. He told Ethan that before making such claims, He should try to retract his intoxicating pheromones. Ethan grimaced, admitting he didn't know how. Julian set down the tray and walked over, poking Ethan's forehead with a cool finger. He told him to use his brain to control it, not his mouth. Then his hand moved down, his fingers closing around Ethan's arousal with a shocking casualness. He said not to use that part of his body to think. Ethan yelped and jumped back, the sudden movement causing a sharp pain. Julian released him without a change in expression, him that next time he'd just cut it off. Under such a threat, Ethan learned to control his pheromones with astonishing speed. That night, Julian worked late and they slept in the office suite. Ethan still felt the pull of Julian's scent, but he was convinced Julian was still looking for a way to mutate. Fearing Ethan would get into trouble if left idle, Julian assigned him work. They fell into a surprisingly harmonious routine, working opposite each other in the vast office. A month later, after a series of successful meetings, Julian announced he was taking Ethan out for dinner as a reward. In the car, a sleek black sedan, Ethan sat in the back, playing on his phone. Julian's voice was laced with exasperation when he told him to sit in the passenger seat next time. When Ethan asked why, Julian replied that it made it easier to slap him if he laughed too loudly. Ethan fell silent. The thought that he had once suspected Julian was attracted to him seemed ludicrous now. When they got home, Ethan went to change. He opened the door to Julian's room and was hit by an overwhelming wave of dark cherry and oak. Julian was half reclined on the bed, his forehead beaded with sweat. His lips were pale, but his cheeks were flushed a deep crimson. The two white rabbit ears trembled in his hair. He looked vulnerable and feverish. Ethan took a hesitant step closer, offering to get him an inhibitor or perform another temporary mark. Julian stared at him, his eyes burning with a terrifying lust. He seemed different from the last time, not a soft rabbit but an aggressive wolf. He gasped for breath, and the words he spoke shocked Ethan to his core. He said that a temporary mark was useless. He had mutated. Ethan's blood ran cold. He backed away, saying he would go buy inhibitors, telling Julian to wait. Julian smiled faintly, a slow, dangerous smile. His voice was a hoarse whisper as he asked if Ethan didn't think it was a little late to run. Before Ethan could process the words, he was tackled onto the bed. The hot, powerful body pinned him down. He struggled, yelling at Julian to calm down, that they were both alphas now. Julian's response was a dark promise that he was willing to be fruitless if it was with Ethan. He grabbed Ethan's waist and pulled him back, his voice a low murmur against Ethan's neck, asking why he was running now, when he had been so arrogant before. He leaned closer, kissing the sensitive skin behind his ear, his voice gentle as he asked how Ethan wanted it. Ethan cried out, struggling like a fish on a line, but Julian's new strength was immense. His body began to betray him, heating up under the onslaught of Julian's pheromones. Julian felt the change, the sweet scent of caramel rising to meet his own. He rolled Ethan over and kissed him. There was no revulsion, only a shocking sense of rightness, as if his body had been waiting for this. But just as Ethan was about to surrender completely, Julian pulled back. His eyes were still red, the veins on his forehead bulging with the effort of his restraint. He let Ethan go. The passionate kiss ended on his forehead. He whispered that he would wait for the day Ethan truly wanted him. He quickly got inhibitors. When he returned, Julian had fallen into a feverish sleep. Ethan administered the injection to him and then to himself. He looked at Julian's pale face, brushing the damp hair from his forehead. A sharp, unfamiliar ache pierced his heart. Julian could have forced him just as Ethan had forced the mark on him. He had chosen not to. Julian's recovery was slow, complicated by a low-grade fever. But the company wouldn't wait. He continued to work, holding virtual meetings from his bed. Feeling a pang of guilt, Ethan tried to help, organizing files and summarizing reports. Julian watched him, a faint smile in his eyes. He told Ethan not to feel guilty, that what happened had been his fault for losing control. Ethan glared at him, telling him to shut up. He handed Julian a glass of water. Julian's lips, moist from the drink, looked impossibly inviting. Ethan had to look away. A low chuckle came from the bed behind him. His own body was now a constant source of frustration, reacting to Julian even without the presence of pheromones. He kept his distance, angry at Julian's ambiguous patience. When Julian's third heat began, Ethan didn't give him the inhibitor right away. Julian wasn't annoyed, just looked at him with a helpless, doting expression. Ethan held up the syringe, trying to be defiant. Julian's smile was gentle. He gave a soft sigh and told Ethan he would just accept whatever he decided. He then asked if Ethan wanted to fight on the bed. The bluntness of the question made Ethan's cheeks flame. A moment later, Julian's rabbit ears twitched, and he made a pitiful, begging gesture. He asked simply if Ethan wanted to be with him. The directness of it stole Ethan's breath. He had realized his own feelings had changed, but to face it head-on left him at a loss. Julian took the initiative, moving his head so his ear brushed against Ethan's hand. He asked if he didn't like furry things. The contrast was devastatingly cute. Ethan knew he was lost. He cleared his throat. He agreed on one condition: he had to be on top. Julian paused, then a slow laugh escaped him. He agreed to Ethan's terms. The next morning, Ethan nursed an aching back and cursed Julian's name. That beast had twisted his words. When he had climbed on top, Julian had laughed, a wicked glint in his eye, and whispered that he was a man of his word. He had let Ethan be on top, but he was inside. That afternoon at the office, Leo, the secretary, saw him, smelled the possessive scent Julian had left on him, and fled with a pale face. In contrast to Ethan's exhaustion, Julian was energized, holding meetings all day. He promised Ethan a real honeymoon once he cleared his schedule. Ethan muttered something about them not even being married. Julian just smiled, saying they would take care of it immediately. He'd already made an appointment at City Hall. The whole experience was surreal. Months ago, they were bitter rivals. Now they were getting a marriage license. He asked Julian when he had fallen for him. Julian just smiled mysteriously. Later that night, the rabbit ears came out, a deliberate act of seduction. Ethan tried to feign indifference, but the pull was too strong. He was captivated by Julian's pheromones, leaning in to bite his shoulder, his voice a low growl as he told his brother how good he smelled. Then he opened his eyes. The familiar canopy of his dorm room bed was above him. He sat bolt upright. From the other bed, there was a simultaneous movement. He turned his head and met Julian's gaze. Julian let out a breath of relief. They were back. In one fluid motion, Julian swung his long legs over and crossed to Ethan's bed. Outside, it was still dark. The date on Ethan's phone showed only a few days had passed since they'd disappeared. He saw the screen of Julian's phone and noticed it was open to the same web novel he had been reading. He wondered aloud if it was all just a shared dream. Julian's response was to bite his lip, not hard, but with intent. He asked if it still felt fake. The sensation was identical. Julian laughed, a low, angry sound. He accused Ethan of thinking of abandoning him the second they got back. Then he pulled something from the pocket of his discarded jeans. Two small, red-bound booklets. Their marriage certificate. Julian closed his eyes, pulling Ethan down to sleep beside him. Ethan buried his face in Julian's neck, but he couldn't smell the rich scent of wine anymore. He asked if Julian would still love him without the pheromones. Julian held him tighter, his lips brushing Ethan's. His tone was full of a deep tenderness. He told him that baby, he was a piece of strawberry toffee, so sweet it went straight to his heart.